the Sacrament of Reconciliation. Yes, it's a great opportunity for us to experience being loosened from that which impedes us to see ourselves as God's beloved, impedes us to see ourselves as anointed, as a child of the living God, impedes us to be the person God created us to be. And so, of course, we know that what happens in the Sacrament of Reconciliation is that a person celebrating the sacrament is sharing with another human being who is a priest. And it's in that act of sharing with that other human being that the one who is celebrating the sacrament hopefully can begin to appreciate the total, non-questionable acceptance by God despite whatever the person is acknowledging as sin. And that's the privilege of being a priest. But again, the Sacrament of Reconciliation becomes even more rich when we can do that with each other. It saddens me when parents of adult children say, you know, I'm beginning to realize painfully my shortcomings as a parent. And I say, well, have you talked to your adult children about that? What? It's, yes, resolve it while you're both alive, while you're all alive. Again, unloosen it, unbind it, let it experience fresh air. Because none of us is called to be perfect. We're only called to be our best. And we can practice reconciliation with one another. In fact, it's a rather graceful moment. At any rate, back to the Sacrament of Reconciliation. It's a way to come and celebrate the already and the not yet. Hopefully, we believe that whenever we sin and become conscious of our sin, we can allow God to say to us, you remain my beloved, I forgive you. And that when we celebrate the sacrament, that is part of what is of primary essence. And it's particularly sad when children confess various things, and I'll ask, well, when you do those things, does God love you? And the times that a child will have to think about it, or even will say no, that's very sad and painful to hear. But again, that's what the sacrament is for, that we can repeatedly be invited to believe that God is all forgiving, that love does not hold any sins against us. And the other main aspect of the Sacrament of Reconciliation is that it is not the priest who unbinds the sins of the person celebrating the sacrament. It is the Holy Spirit. The priest, says the words. It's the Holy Spirit who acts. And actually it's all three, Creator, Word, and Holy Spirit. I absolve you in the name of. And hopefully the church will change the words, I absolve you, because it just confuses people when I say what I just said a minute ago, and then I absolve you. Well, what is it? Which way is it? So, unfortunately, throughout history, people have invested all this power in a priest which he doesn't have. At least this priest doesn't have. Because forgiveness in that sense is God's work. And I am there only to make it as easy as possible, to facilitate it, to reassure. And so many times I will say, I pray that my acceptance of you and of what you have shared about yourself would be some minor, tiny reflection of how fully God, as it states in the Old Testament, not only forgives, but he forgets. As one of the Psalms says, as east is from the west, so far are our sins from God. So that's what's being celebrated in the Sacrament of Reconciliation, which gets us to another point about priests who refuse to give absolution. I was not appointed by God. God did not go on vacation and say, Roman, when the situation arises, you have my permission to act in my stead. You don't have to offer the prayer of absolution if you don't think this person is sincere. I've got enough trouble with my own life, let alone determine whether someone else is sincere or not. I mean, they came to me, they're coming, and that is sometimes what I will say when people sit down and say, it's been 30 years, it's been 40 years. And one of the things I will offer is, if, depending on where that person is, what they're feeling, and what it was like to step through the door of that reconciliation room, one of the things I will offer them is to say, I know it says in the Catechism that we're to confess mortal sins by kind and number. But I'd like to think that if Jesus were sitting in his chair, he would take your walking into that, through that doorway, as an indication of how you want to change your life, how you want to let God ever more fully into your life, so that you can change in light of God's grace and wisdom. I know what it says in the Catechism, and I'm not there to think that I know more than the Catechism. I'm there as an instrument of God's goodness. And I'm supposed to say to this person, is that all you've done in 40 years? It can't be. Think of some other. Again, that's not what the sacrament is about.
So it's not about getting back in God's good graces. It sounds like you're saying it's not about making God love us again, but just a reminder that God has loved us through it all.
It's a celebration of how we hopefully have experienced forgiveness in our lives up to that point, and how God has been part of that forgiveness that we've accepted for ourselves and extended hopefully to others. And that the not yet is, aha, here we are. This human interchange between priest and the person celebrating the Sacrament of Reconciliation is a moment in which the person celebrating the sacrament, as well as the priest, to have this joyful moment of what it's like to, and that's what I typically will say, not typically, often I will say, thank you. And people, as they are getting up to leave, and they say, what? I said, I know I'm functioning as a priest, but I'm still a human being, and you're sharing what you shared with me is gift.